At dawn, she came out of the mist, calm, silent, walking across the border as if it were just another road.
But at the border, everyone has secrets.
From deserts to cities, from secrets to love, every border hides a story.
The woman appeared at dawn when the mist still clung to the Imjin River like a ghost refusing to leave. Corporal Park Ji-hoon spotted her from his watchtower, a silhouette stumbling through the frozen reeds, her dark coat torn at the shoulder. His hand moved instinctively to his radio, but something made him pause. She wasn't running. Defectors always ran, their bodies electric with desperation. This woman walked as if she had all the time in the world, as if crossing the most heavily militarized border on Earth was nothing more than a morning stroll. He radioed command, reporting a single female approaching from the north with no visible weapons. The response was immediate: detain and secure. Ji-hoon descended from his post, his boots crunching through ice-crusted grass. His rifle hung across his chest, present but not raised. 3 years of border duty had taught him to read intention in body language, and this woman's shoulders carried something more complex than fear. She stopped 20 meters from the demarcation line, her breath forming small clouds in the February air. She called out in Korean, her accent carrying the harder consonants of the north, explaining that she was looking for her brother. His name was Song Min-jun, and he had crossed 3 months ago. Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. The name was familiar. He'd processed dozens of defectors, but Song Min-jun had been different. The man had arrived in September with manufacturing expertise, technical drawings that intelligence had found valuable. Too valuable, some had whispered. He instructed her to step across the line slowly, keeping her hands visible. She obeyed, and as she crossed that invisible boundary, Ji-hoon saw her face clearly for the first time. High cheekbones, eyes that held steady despite obvious exhaustion. A small scar above her left eyebrow. She introduced herself as Song Yeonhwa and then collapsed into the frozen grass. 2 days later, the interrogation room at the Paju Intelligence Center smelled of instant coffee and fluorescent lighting. Ji-hoon sat across from Yeonhwa, who had been given medical clearance, a change of clothes, and 48 hours of sleep. Between them lay a folder containing everything the National Intelligence Service had compiled on her brother. Intelligence Officer Choi paced behind Yeonhwa's chair, explaining that Song Min-jun had claimed political persecution when he defected. His story had been solid, his background check clean. But now his sister's appearance raised uncomfortable questions about whether he'd been sent to plant roots for a spy network. Yeonhwa insisted he was her oppa, using that intimate Korean term for older brother, and explained they'd been separated when their parents died, placed in different state orphanages. She'd only discovered his defection when a factory supervisor accidentally mentioned it. She'd had to find him. Ji-hoon watched her hands carefully. They stayed flat on the table, no fidgeting. Either she was telling the truth, or she was exceptionally well trained. Officer Choi's skepticism was written in every line of his face as he delivered the devastating news. Song Min-jun had disappeared 2 weeks ago. He'd left his apartment in Incheon without warning, emptying his bank account the day before. Yeonhwa's composure cracked. She insisted he wouldn't do that, but Choi suggested Min-jun might have been recalled after completing his mission, which would make her either a very unfortunate sister or a very convenient follow-up operative. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Ji-hoon felt something twist in his chest. Jong, that uniquely Korean concept of emotional connection that built slowly but ran deep. He barely knew this woman, yet he found himself wanting to believe her. It was unprofessional and dangerous. He heard himself volunteer to investigate before they classified her as hostile, requesting 3 days. When Choi questioned why he'd take on babysitting duty, Ji-hoon explained that he'd processed her brother and remembered details that might not be in the file. More importantly, if she was telling the truth, she was lost and alone in a country she didn't know. That wasn't the Republic of Korea he served. It was a calculated appeal to patriotic duty and humanitarian values. The balance every South Korean was taught to maintain. Choi studied him for a long moment, then agreed. 3 days, and she wouldn't leave his sight. But then Choi's voice dropped, mentioning that Ji-hoon's father had been a good man and warning him not to let sentiment make him sloppy. The mention of Captain Park, who had died during the Second Battle of Yeonpyeong killed by North Korean artillery, was both reminder and warning. Ji-hoon had joined the military to honor that sacrifice, to stand watch over the same soil his dad defended. Seoul in winter was a shock of neon and noise. Ji-hoon drove Yeonhwa through neighborhoods that glittered with wealth she'd never imagined, past massive screens advertising products she'd never heard of. She sat rigid in the passenger seat, her reflection fragmented in the car window. He asked if it was overwhelming. She admitted it was like waking up in a dream where everything moved so fast, even the people walked like they were being chased. Ji-hoon explained the concept of pali pali, hurry hurry, the phrase that defined South Korean culture. It wasn't always healthy, he admitted, but it was how they'd built the gleaming skyline around them. They were heading to Song Min-jun's last known address in a working-class district where recent defectors often settled. The apartment building was narrow and grey, wedged between a Noribang karaoke bar and a convenience store. When Yeonhwa saw it, her voice became small as she asked if this was really where he'd lived. The building's elderly manager remembered Min-jun as a polite young man, though troubled. She mentioned hearing him talk to himself late at night, and then there were those visitors, 2 men who'd come 3 weeks ago who didn't look like friends. Too formal, too cold. Inside the spare apartment, Ji-hoon noticed something that made his pulse quicken, a map of Seoul with several locations marked in red ink. The marks clustered around 3 areas, the electronics district of Yongsan, the port of Incheon, and the DMZ tourism area. Yeonhwa moved through the space like a mourner, touching surfaces her brother had touched. When she found his old jacket in the closet and pressed it to her face, her shoulders shook. She whispered that she remembered the patch on the elbow. She'd sewn it when he tore it climbing trees. Ji-hoon photographed the map, recognizing that all the marked locations related to electronics or transportation infrastructure. If someone wanted to gather intelligence on South Korean technology, these would be logical targets. When he suggested her brother might have been a spy, her face went pale. He clarified carefully that someone might have recruited Min-jun either before he crossed or after. The question was whether he'd gone willingly or been coerced. A sound from the hallway made them freeze. Footsteps, deliberate and unhurried. Ji-hoon's hand went to his sidearm as the door swung open to reveal 2 men in dark suits that hung slightly loose, a style more common in the north. The lead man had a burn scar running from his ear to his collar. The scarred man addressed Yeonhwa directly, saying her brother sent his regards and asked that she come home now. Everything happened in the space of a breath. Ji-hoon drew his pistol, stepping between Yeonhwa and the intruders, announcing that NIS agents were en route and giving them 10 seconds to leave. Scarface claimed they weren't there for violence, only to collect what belonged to the Democratic People's Republic. The woman had come to find her brother, and they were simply reuniting them. Wasn't that what she wanted? Yeonhwa's voice carried steel that hadn't been there before as she refused to go back. She'd come to bring Min-jun home, their real home. When the younger man reached into his jacket, Ji-hoon's training took over. He fired once, the shot impossibly loud in the small apartment. The man staggered back, clutching his shoulder, his weapon clattering to the floor. Scarface didn't flinch. He addressed Ji-hoon by full name and rank, mentioning his father, Captain Park Sung-ho, hero of Yeonpyeong. He suggested the captain would be disappointed to see his son protecting traitors. The words were designed to wound, and they did. But Ji-hoon held his aim steady, warning that if they knew his name, they knew he wouldn't miss twice. For a long moment, the tableau held. Then Scarface smiled coldly, promising they'd be in touch. When Ji-hoon discovered the truth about dear Yeonhwa, he should remember they'd offered him a chance. After they disappeared down the stairs and the building manager's screaming filled the air, Ji-hoon was already dialing Officer Choi. He reported North Korean agents armed in Seoul, then requested the full classified file on Song Min-jun, everything they weren't telling him. Behind him, Yeonhwa stood frozen with the jacket still clutched in her hands. Tears streamed down her face as she admitted she should have told him everything from the beginning. The safe house was an unremarkable apartment in Gangnam, secured by 3 layers of NIS protocols. At the kitchen table, with Officer Choi standing sentinel by the door, Yeonhwa finally revealed the truth. Her brother had been recruited by state security 3 years ago. They'd told him he'd be helping the motherland by gathering technical information from the south. He hadn't wanted to, but they'd threatened her. Said she'd be sent to a camp if he refused. So he'd come south as a spy initially. But he'd changed, she insisted. He'd written secret letters passed through a network of defectors who still had contacts. He'd told her he'd seen the truth, that everything they'd been told was lies. He'd begged her to cross, to escape while she could. His last letter said he was cutting ties with his handlers, that he wouldn't work for them anymore. Choi stated flatly that was when he disappeared. Yeonhwa's voice broke as she admitted she thought they'd taken him back or killed him. Ji-hoon felt the room tilt. His father had died defending against northern aggression. He'd built his entire identity around that sacrifice, around clear lines of loyalty and duty. But here was a woman whose brother had tried to cross those lines in both directions, whose loyalty to family had driven every choice. He asked why she hadn't told them immediately, unable to keep the hurt from his voice. She explained that she'd known how it would sound. She'd thought if she could just find him, prove he'd changed, then maybe there was hope. In the north, Hyeojong, familial loyalty, was everything, the foundation of their entire society. She couldn't abandon him, even if it meant lying, even if it meant risking everything. Choi pulled up photos of the agents from earlier, identifying them as Reconnaissance Bureau elites. They didn't cross the border for one defector, even a valuable one. Which meant her brother had something they desperately wanted, or he knew something critical. Scrolling through classified documents, Choi revealed that before disappearing, Song Min-jun had contacted American military intelligence. He'd claimed to have information about cyber warfare capabilities, specifically code that could infiltrate Seoul's power grid and military communications. He'd been scheduled to debrief the day he vanished. Ji-hoon suggested slowly that perhaps Min-jun had hidden the information. Maybe that's why they wanted his sister, because they thought he'd told her where it was. Yeonhwa's eyes widened as she pulled out a small piece of paper from her pocket. Folded many times. Her brother had sent 3 letters, but she'd only understood 2. The third contained just numbers and a phrase about where their mother used to sing to them. She'd thought he was being sentimental. Ji-hoon asked where their mother had sung. Yeonhwa explained it was everywhere. Their mother had loved music. But there was one special place by the Yalu River where it bent near Sinwiju, a small half-ruined temple where their mother would sing folk songs while they played. Though still technically in North Korean territory, it was near the border. If the location coordinates were in that letter, they were looking at an extraction mission in hostile territory. Choi pointed out it was impossible. Even with approval, the diplomatic fallout would be catastrophic. Ji-hoon interrupted, arguing with respect that the fallout would be nothing compared to the North getting that cyber warfare intelligence back. That grid attack could plunge Seoul into darkness and disable their defenses. Everything his father had died protecting would be at risk. The invocation of his father was deliberate, framing personal desire as patriotic duty. But Ji-hoon realized it wasn't entirely manipulation. He believed it. And more than that, he believed in Yeonhwa, in her grief, her loyalty, her courage to cross worlds for family. After a long silence, Choi suggested that if a border guard, acting on his own initiative, followed a lead and happened to cross into a demilitarized area while pursuing hostile agents, that would still be treason, but smaller treason. The kind they might bury if he succeeded. If he failed, he'd be an unauthorized incursion the Republic would officially disavow. His father's legacy would be tainted, and he'd likely be dead. Ji-hoon looked at Yeonhwa and asked if her brother was alive, or if he was risking everything for a dead man and stolen data. She answered simply that she felt him, the way Ji-hoon felt his father watching over him. That bond didn't break just because someone crossed a border or even crossed into death. Her hand found his across the table as she admitted that if there was a chance Min-jun was alive, she had to try. And if Ji-hoon came with her, maybe they both found what they were looking for. He thought about his father's last words before Yeonpyeong. Protect the people, not just the border. Remember that on the other side, they're people too. They would leave at dawn. The temple by the Yalu River was exactly as Yonhua remembered. Stone walls softened by moss, a roof open to the sky, prayer bells silent with rust. They'd crossed in darkness, using the same frozen reeds where she'd emerged days before, moving like shadows through a landscape Ji-hoon knew by heart, but had never touched. The numbers from Min Jun's letter led them to a specific stone in the temple's wall. While Yonhua kept watch wrapped in her brother's jacket against the winter cold, Ji-hoon worked the stone loose to reveal a USB drive wrapped in waterproof cloth and a letter. The letter began with an affectionate diminutive of Yonhua's name, apologizing for the burden he was placing on her. If she was reading this, he'd failed to escape, or was dead. The drive contained everything: proof of the cyber program, names of agents in Seoul, the code itself. He'd thought he could use it to buy his freedom, but he'd been naive. They'd never let him go. But she could still have a life. She should take the intelligence to the Americans or South Koreans and buy her freedom with what he couldn't buy for himself. Everything he'd done, every choice he'd made, was to protect her. That's what an older brother does. Yonhua's hands shook as she lowered the letter, whispering that he was gone before she'd even crossed. Ji-hoon wanted to comfort her, but movement at the temple's entrance stopped him. 5 men emerged from the pre-dawn darkness, led by Scarface. Behind them stumbled a 6th figure, gaunt, with hands bound. Song Min-jun was alive. Scarface called it a touching reunion. The dutiful sister, the honorable soldier, the traitor brother. A very Korean drama with lots of Han, that beautiful sorrow Koreans loved so much. He wielded the concept of Han, the deep-rooted resentment and grief permeating Korean culture, like a weapon, mocking the pain he'd caused. Yonhua offered the drive in exchange for her brother's freedom. Scarface agreed they'd take the drive and the engineer, who still had value. But she and the corporal were loose ends, witnesses, embarrassments. Ji-hoon's rifle was rising, but he was outnumbered 5-1, with Min Jun in the line of fire. The old calculation ran through his mind. Military training versus impossible odds. He would die here, far from the country he'd sworn to protect, having violated every protocol that gave his service meaning. Then Yonhua raised her hands with the USB drive visible and walked toward Scarface, offering herself instead. She'd come back, work for them, gather information, whatever they needed. Just let the men live. Her brother shouted in protest, but Ji-hoon understood. It was the same choice Min Jun had made years ago, sacrifice personal freedom for family. The same choice his father had made on Yeonpyeong. It was the deepest current of Korean culture, the belief that individual life mattered less than collective survival, than jong, than duty. As Scarface began to respond dismissively, a shot came from the ridgeline above the temple. His head snapped back, his body dropping like a puppet with cut strings. Chaos erupted with more shots and shouting as the North Korean agents scattered for cover. Ji-hoon grabbed Yonhua, pulling her behind the temple's stone wall as Min Jun broke free and ran toward them. Officer Choi's voice crackled through Ji-hoon's earpiece, explaining that American drones had spotted the crossing and a joint security area team was converging on their position. He suggested trying not to get shot by their own side. The firefight was brief and brutal. By the time South Korean special forces secured the area, 3 North Korean agents were dead and 2 captured. Min Jun collapsed into his sister's arms, both weeping with relief and trauma. Ji-hoon stood apart, watching the sun rise over the temple, over the border, over 2 countries that were once one. His hands shook from adrenaline and the weight of what he'd done. Treason, salvation, maybe both. Officer Choi appeared beside him through the drifting smoke, asking about the drive. Ji-hoon held it up, noting that Min Jun would need to debrief and that both siblings needed immunity. Choi confirmed it was already arranged. The Americans were very motivated by the intelligence, but Ji-hoon would face an inquiry. What he'd done, crossing the border, unauthorized contact with hostile forces, was serious. When Choi mentioned his father, Ji-hoon interrupted to say his father would understand. He'd said once that they guarded the border to protect people, not to maintain a principle. These were people. They mattered. Choi nodded slowly, calling it idealistic but messy. He asked what Ji-hoon would do when this was over, when Yeon-hwa was free to choose her own life. Ji-hoon said he'd ask her to stay, not because he needed her to, but because he wanted to know who she became when she was finally free to choose. And if she chose to walk away, at least she'd be choosing. Choi called it very romantic and suggested not mentioning it during the court-martial.